Hello, my friends. This is Miss Kirkman coming to you with your absolute value notes. As you know, there will be no school on Thursday, March the 18th, 2021, because of the threat of severe weather that Randolph County is supposed to be getting on Thursday. So I have made this recording for all of my friends who have not written down their absolute value notes in their notebook. So the quote of the day is, practice makes progress, not perfect. Say what? Yes, my friends, practice makes progress, not perfect. The more practice that you have at doing something, the more progress you're going to make. So let's say you are not so great at basketball, but you really want to try out for the team. So the more practice that you do, the more progress you will make to become a better player so that you can make the team. It's not about being perfect, you guys. Nobody's perfect. It's about the practice that you do along the way so that you can progress into a great, successful learner. Today, you're going to be taking notes on absolute value. So in your notebooks, on your table of contents page, you're going to write number 29, absolute value notes. Your learning target is, I can understand what finding absolute value means. Keep in mind that this is a recording and that you can pause this recording at any time so that you can write your information into your notebook, and then you can press play again when you are ready. So what is absolute value? Absolute value is a number's distance from, anyone know? 0. Absolute value is always positive. So if you're looking on a number line, and you can see that I have a number line here, if I were to look at the number 2, how far is 2 away from 0? Well, I can go, if here we are at 2, I can go 1, 2 hops, and I'm at 0. So the absolute value of -2 would be 0. The same would be true for its opposite. Okay, what is the opposite of -2? It's 2. So how far is 2 away from 0? I can go 1, 2 hops. So the absolute value of 2 is 2. The absolute value of -2 is 2, because the absolute value is always positive. And when we're finding the absolute value, we're finding the distance from that number, whether positive or negative, and how far it is away from 0. You have 2 examples here. So you have -5, the absolute value of -5. And so you know as well is that the symbol for absolute value is these double lines. Okay? And I'm just going to put a letter A in there, okay? So the absolute value of A, okay? That A could be positive, it could be negative. So know that the absolute value bars is what we call those, is the symbol for absolute value. So back to the example that we have. If we have -5, what is the absolute value for -5? If I'm using my number line down here at the bottom, I go to -5 and I count how many hops it takes me to get to 0. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 hops to get to 0. So the absolute value of -5 is 5. Now let's look at our second example, the absolute value of 4. So if I find 4 on my number line, I'm going to see how far away 4 is from 0. 1, 2, 3, 4. So the absolute value of 4 is 4. Now you've heard me talk about the word opposites when we talked about -2 and 2. So let's talk about them, okay? What does it mean by opposites? Opposites are numbers that have the same distance from what? You guessed it, 0. Numbers that have the same distance from 0. So go back to my example of -2 and 2. They both are the same distance from 0. They're opposite numbers. One's negative and one's positive. They have the same distance. They'll have the same absolute value. So to answer our second one, opposites have the same absolute value. Opposites have the same absolute value. When we're thinking about opposites of a positive number, now this has nothing to do with absolute value, it just has to do with opposite numbers. So the opposite of a positive number is always the negative number. Okay, so the opposite of a +2 is -2. The opposite of +5 is -5, which means our final statement on here, the opposite of a negative number, it is always positive. So if we're looking at -4, the opposite is +4. If we're looking at -6, the opposite is +6. Remember to pause this video to get this information written down, and I'll see you in a second. Now we have one more piece of information to write down. Now this may blow your mind a little bit because we just got finished talking about how absolute value is always positive. But we haven't said anything about what happens when a negative symbol is on the outside of the absolute value bars. So when we have a negative symbol outside of our absolute value bars, okay, so if we have absolute value bars right here, and let's say that we have a 5 here, and we have a negative on the outside, a negative outside, the absolute value bars means the opposite the opposite of the absolute value the opposite of the absolute value which is always a negative answer. Say what? What does that mean, Miss Kirkman? A negative outside of absolute value bars means the opposite of the absolute value. Okay, so back to our example that we have right here. If we have the 5 and we're looking for the absolute value of 5, the absolute value of a number is always positive. Okay, so that means the absolute value of 5 is 5. But when we have a negative outside of the absolute value bars, that means the opposite of the absolute value, which means we have a negative 5. So I want you to look, and that's our first example that we have right here. So I want you to look at our second example. So our second example is the absolute value of negative 4. Remember, the absolute value of any number is positive. So the absolute value of negative 4 is 4. But we have the negative on the outside. So the absolute value of negative 4 is negative 4. So let's try some. What is the absolute value of negative 6? Remember, the absolute value of any number is a positive number. So the absolute value of negative 6 would be, you guessed it, 6. What number has the same value as 3? Think about what we talked about with opposites. Opposite numbers have the same value. And you are right. Negative 3. Negative 3 and 3 are opposite numbers and they have the same absolute value. What is the opposite of 8? You got it. Negative 8. So those were some absolute values using the words. Now let's look at some using the symbols. What is the absolute value? We're on number 4. What is the absolute value of 6/10? Don't let decimals scare you because they're just numbers. The absolute value of 6/10 is 6/10. Good job. Look at number 5. What is the absolute value of 9? Again, remember the definition of absolute value. The absolute value of 9 is 9. And let's look at number 6. What is the absolute value of negative 1/2? Remember, the absolute value of any number is a positive. So yes, it would be positive 1/2. So I want you to think about question number 7. What is the relationship between 10 and negative 10, thinking about absolute value and opposites? I'm going to give you a few seconds to think about that. So the relationship between 10 and negative 10 is that if I'm looking at both of those numbers on a number line, they are the same distance from 0. 10 is 10 hops from 0. Negative 10 is 10 hops from 0. They both have the same absolute value. The absolute value of 10 is 10. The absolute value of negative 10 is also 10 because the absolute value of any number is positive until you have a negative on the outside of the absolute value bars. 10 and negative 10 are also opposite numbers. You guys did a really great job on this. I really do hate that we're not together today to be able to do the next activity, which would have been to go to Kahoot it and do a absolute value Kahoot game. Hopefully sometime in the near future, I can get you guys caught up on it. The ones who got to participate in it already did a great job. Absolute value is really an easy concept. It does get a little harder when we start talking about equations that are inside absolute value bars. And we kind of do it like we do order of operations. So go back and review this as often as you need to. You can also go back and watch our recording from Wednesday's Google Meet because I did share an absolute value video in there that will be helpful for you as well. I hope you guys have a great day. Stay safe, and I'll see you soon. Oh, and you never know, you guys, there could be a TikTok coming your way.